The document hit the floor before anyone could stop it. Katherine Harlow's hand had moved fast, faster than anyone in that conference room expected, and the thick manila folder she had pulled from the black man's grip scattered across the marble in a fan of papers that caught the light from the overhead chandeliers. The papers were not evidence files. They were not confidential client records. They were not anything Katherine had thought to consider before she grabbed them, because she had not thought to consider anything about this man at all, except that he did not look like he belonged in her conference room at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. "Call security," she said, not loudly, not with the theatrical heat of someone losing control, with the precise, unhurried calm of someone who was used to problems solving themselves the moment she addressed them. 3 lawyers standing near the window did not move. They were looking at the papers on the floor, and at the man who had been holding them, and at the expression on that man's face, which was not fear and not anger, and not the particular desperate scrambling that Katherine's voice usually produced when she used it like that. A small girl appeared in the doorway. "Daddy?" Her voice was thin and uncertain, the voice of a child who had fallen asleep somewhere warm and woken up in a room where the air had changed. Katherine Harlow did not look at the girl. Marcus Coleman looked at his daughter, then back at Katherine Harlow, then down at the papers scattered across the floor of the conference room that had his name on the wall outside its door. Before anyone in that room picked up a phone, something would happen that none of them would forget. If you believe the world moves too fast past the people who built it, subscribe. You're exactly where you need to be. Marcus Coleman had a system for Wednesdays, and it never changed. He picked Lily up from the after-school program by 5, stopped at the Thai place on Monroe for 1 order of pad see ew. She had loved it since she was 4 and showed no signs of reconsidering, and was back in the apartment before 6:30. After dinner, Lily did her reading while Marcus reviewed the week's paperwork at the kitchen table. By 8:30, she was in bed. By 8:40, the apartment was quiet. It was not a complicated life. It was not the life he had spent 15 years building. But it was the life that existed now, and Marcus had made his peace with that distinction in the months after his wife died, when he had sat in a kitchen that still smelled like her, and understood that the life you plan and the life you actually live are 2 different documents, and only one of them is real. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered, close-cropped hair going silver at the temples, a face that had settled into the kind of watchful stillness people sometimes mistook for vacancy. He wore work clothes most days, dark cargo pants, plain shirts, boots that showed actual use, and drove a truck that was 7 years old and did not apologize for it. 3 nights a week he worked the custodial shift at a building on 5th and Congress. Among its tenants on the 14th floor sat the law firm of Harlow, Vance & Associates. The firm had not always been called that. Lily was 8 years old and had her mother's eyes and her father's habit of thinking before she spoke, which made her seem older than she was, and which Marcus considered one of the finest things she had inherited from either of them. She was small for her age, with braids she had recently begun insisting on doing herself, with results that improved each month, and she carried everywhere a worn paperback about a girl who could speak to horses, which she had read 4 times and showed no signs of stopping. On Wednesdays, because the after-school program let out early and the sitter was unavailable, Lily came with him. She had quietly claimed a corner of the 14th floor break room over the course of 3 months, a chair positioned under the best light, the outlet she used for her tablet, a small folding table she had begun calling my desk, with complete unself-consciousness. She did her homework there. She ate her snack there. She had never complained once. Marcus liked that about her. He liked a lot of things about her. He tried, on certain evenings, not to like them too openly. Not from any fear of attachment, but because the particular ache of watching a child become herself when her mother could not see it was the kind of thing that got complicated if you looked at it directly. So he watched her from the corner of his eye instead, and that was usually enough. He had worked the night shift at this building for 14 months. Nobody on the 14th floor had ever asked him his last name. The firm of Harlow, Vance & Associates occupied the entire 14th floor, and it occupied it the way firms like this always did, completely, confidently, with the specific permanence of an institution that had never seriously considered the possibility of being anywhere else. 18 lawyers, 3 senior partners, a support staff of 12, 2 conference rooms with mahogany tables long enough to seat 16, a library with actual books, organized by practice area, their spines unbroken in the way that suggested they were kept for the impression they made rather than the knowledge they contained. The hallway that ran the length of the floor was lined with framed accolades and civic photographs, the visual history of a firm that had spent 9 years accumulating the kind of reputation that eventually started accumulating itself. At the far end of that hallway, near the entrance to Conference Room A, there was something else, a small bronze plaque, roughly the size of a hardback book, set flush into the wall at eye level. Polished regularly, Marcus had polished it himself twice on Wednesday evenings. It read, Coleman & Associates, Est 2001. Marcus J. Coleman, founding partner. The firm had changed its name in 2018 when Katherine Harlow made partner and the senior equity structure was reorganized following a settlement that Marcus had personally negotiated from a hospital bed with a broken collarbone and a drainage tube in his chest. The plaque had stayed. It was the kind of object that exists long enough in a corridor to become invisible to the people who pass it every day. Marcus had noticed, over 14 months, that not one person on the 14th floor had ever stopped in front of it. Katherine Harlow was 38, and she had the specific kind of confidence that formed in people who had been right so many times in succession that being wrong had stopped feeling like a real possibility. She had joined the firm at 26 as a first-year associate, made partner in 7 years, which was fast, and had driven 3 major client wins in the 18 months since the name change. She was precise, demanding, and broadly respected in the way that people were respected when their results were undeniable and their standards were high enough that everyone around them lived in a slight and permanent state of readiness. She believed in preparation. She believed in standards. She believed that the environment a firm projected was inseparable from the outcomes it produced. What she believed about the man pushing the cleaning cart down the corridor on Wednesday nights had never occurred to her to articulate, because it had never occurred to her that it required articulation. He was part of the building's infrastructure. He was noticed in the way the HVAC system was noticed, only when something went wrong. She had walked past him 40 or 50 times across 14 months, and had not once looked at the plaque on her way past. The floors they kept clean were walked across by people who never looked down. Marcus understood this the way he understood most things, not with bitterness, but with the particular clarity of a man who had chosen to be on both sides of it and knew exactly what each side looked like. The call came at 9:47. Marcus was in the corridor outside Conference Room B, working the baseboards with the kind of methodical attention that nighttime cleaning required, the details that went unnoticed during business hours and revealed themselves only under direct light at the end of the day. He heard the elevator chime. Then footsteps, fast and purposeful, the particular rhythm of someone who had somewhere to be and was not interested in the distance between here and there. Katherine Harlow came around the corner in a dark coat she had not yet removed, a phone pressed to her ear, speaking in the clipped shorthand of someone delivering instructions rather than having a conversation. She passed Marcus without registering him, pushed open the door of Conference Room A and disappeared inside. She was followed 30 seconds later by 2 associates, both in their late 20s, both carrying the particular expression of people who had been pulled from whatever they were doing on a Wednesday evening and were trying very hard to look like this was fine. Marcus continued working the baseboard. He did not need to hear the conversation to understand the shape of it. He had been in enough of those rooms to know what the late-night emergency energy felt like from the outside. He had also, by long habit and the particular awareness of a man who had spent years reading situations before entering them, already registered what he had seen through the conference room's glass panel as Katherine walked past. The alderman file, open on the table. The blue cover with the gold clip that had been produced in discovery 6 years ago in a case Marcus himself had shepherded from deposition to verdict over the course of 14 months. He recognized it because he had organized the original document structure himself, in a different office, in a different chapter of his life, when he still wore suits to work, and his wife was still alive, and the firm on the door still had his name on it. He stopped working the baseboard. He thought about it for a moment, the specific, measured way he thought about things that had more than one possible response. Then he set down the cloth, folded it neatly over the handle of the cart, and walked to the conference room door. He knocked twice. Short, even. Katherine looked up from the table. The two associates looked up, three faces turning toward the door with the identical expression of people interrupted at something important, and the slight additional sharpening that came with registering who was doing the interrupting. "We're in a meeting," Katherine said. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply the voice she used for things that did not require explanation. "I understand," Marcus said. "I think there may be an issue with the documents on the table." A pause. The kind that happens when what someone has said does not immediately match the category their voice suggested it would. "Excuse me," Katherine said. "The Alderman file," Marcus said. "The blue cover. If that's the version produced in the initial discovery pool, there's a pagination error in Exhibits 14 through 17 that was identified during trial prep but never corrected in the physical copy. Depending on what you're doing with it tonight, that could matter." The room was very quiet. One of the associates, a young woman with close-cropped natural hair and a yellow legal pad in front of her, had stopped writing and was looking at Marcus with an expression that was not dismissal but something more careful than that. The other associate, a man in his early 30s with his jacket over the back of his chair, had glanced at the file, then back at Marcus, then at Katherine. Katherine had not moved from her position at the head of the table. She was looking at him the way she looked at everything that did not immediately compute, with complete attention and no patience. "How do you know anything about the Alderman file?" she said. "I know the case," Marcus said. "You know the case," she repeated. The flatness in her voice was not mockery. It was the sound of someone filing an incoming statement under a category that did not yet exist and waiting for more information. "If you'll let me see the exhibit index," Marcus began. "Why do you have documents?" Katherine said. She was looking at his hands. He was holding the manila folder he had picked up from the cart, the one containing the building's maintenance schedule and the 14th floor cleaning log, because he had picked it up reflexively before knocking, the automatic habit of a man who did not enter rooms without something in his hands. The misreading happened in under 2 seconds. He watched it happen on her face. The folder, the late hour, the conference room she had not known was accessible, the file she had not known anyone outside her team was familiar with. And he watched her reach the wrong conclusion with the speed and certainty of someone who trusted their own assessments completely. "Give me that," Katherine said, and she crossed the room and pulled the folder from his grip before he could respond. And the maintenance log and the cleaning schedule scattered across the marble floor in a fan of papers that caught the light from the chandeliers. Marcus looked at the papers. He looked at Katherine. He said nothing. "Call security," Katherine said. Then she looked at the young female associate. Now, the associate reached for her phone. The other associate looked at the floor. Nobody looked at the plaque in the hallway. Then Lily appeared in the doorway. She was wearing the oversized sweatshirt she changed into when they arrived, the one that reached her knees, and her horsebook was pressed against her chest with both arms, and she was looking at her father with the specific, focused expression of a child who was tracking the room before deciding how to respond to it. "Daddy," she said. Just that. Just the word, with everything that the word contained. Marcus looked at his daughter. The particular quality of calm that settled over him in that moment was not something he had acquired easily or quickly. It had been built over years in rooms far more dangerous than this one. Rooms where the cost of losing the calm was measured in things that could not be taken back. He had learned in those rooms that stillness was not the absence of response. It was the choice to make the right one. He looked back at Katherine Harlow and said, with complete evenness, "I'd like you to look at the plaque on the wall outside this room." Katherine blinked. It was a small reaction, barely perceptible, but it was there. "What?" "The bronze plaque," Marcus said. "At the end of the hallway, outside the door." Nobody moved for a moment. Then the young female associate stood up. Not because Katherine asked her to, not because anyone told her to. She stood up with the quiet deliberateness of someone who had decided on her own that this was the right thing to do, and she walked to the conference room door, and she opened it, and she looked at the plaque on the wall. She stood there for a long moment, long enough for the room behind her to notice that she was not coming back immediately. Long enough for Katherine to say, with the first uncertainty Marcus had heard in her voice all evening, "What is it?" The associate turned around. Her expression had changed in the way that expressions change when information arrives that reorganizes everything that came before it. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the plaque. She looked at Katherine. "His name is on the wall," she said. The sound the room made was not quite silence. It was something just beneath silence. The sound of three people processing information that did not fit the shape of what they had believed 3 seconds ago. Katherine walked to the door herself. She stood in front of the plaque and read it. She read it twice. The hallway was lit by the low overnight lighting, and the bronze caught it the way bronze caught it, warmly, without drama, and the name stood exactly where it had always stood, in the same place it had been for every one of the 40 or 50 times she had walked past without looking. She came back into the room. Marcus had not moved from where he was standing. Lily had come to stand beside him. Her hand had found his without him reaching for it. The automatic navigation of a child who knew where steadiness was. And she was holding her horsebook against her chest with her other arm and looking at Katherine Harlow with the frank, uncomplicated attention of a child who had not yet learned to pretend she did not see what she saw. Katherine looked at Marcus, then at Lily, then at the scattered papers on the floor, the maintenance schedule, the cleaning log, the entirely ordinary documents of a man doing an entirely ordinary job in a building that had started as his. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She tried again. "I didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't," Marcus said. The simplicity of his response landed harder than anything complicated would have. 3 words, offered without heat, without the satisfaction of a man who had been waiting for this moment. Just a statement of fact from someone who had long since stopped being surprised by what people failed to notice about him. The male associate had picked up the scattered papers from the floor. He was stacking them carefully, not because anyone had asked him to, but because it was the only useful thing available to him in that moment, and he needed something to do with his hands. Katherine stood in the center of the room and looked at the plaque through the open door. Her expression was doing several things at once, processing, revising, arriving at a conclusion about herself that she was not going to be able to walk back from the way she walked back from most things. She was not a woman who lied to herself easily, and what she was looking at right now did not give her room for comfortable interpretation. "I've walked past that plaque," she said. She was not speaking to the room. She was speaking the thought aloud as it arrived, because she was the kind of person who had always trusted her thinking more when she heard it. "I've walked past it every day for 6 years. Most people do," Marcus said. Katherine looked at him. There was something in his face she was trying to read. Not anger. Not the banked satisfaction of a man who had waited for this. And whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it in the form she expected. What she found instead was something quieter and harder to categorize. The expression of a man who had understood something about this situation long before she did, and had simply been waiting, without urgency, for the room to catch up. "The Alderman file," she said, and her voice had changed. Not softer, exactly, but recalibrated. "What were you saying about Exhibit 14 through 17? The pagination in the physical discovery copy skips from Exhibit 13 to Exhibit 18, Marcus said. Exhibits 14 through 17 exist in the digital record but were never included in the physical production. If you're presenting from the physical copy tonight, you have a gap in your exhibit chain that opposing counsel will find before you do if you don't close it first." The young female associate had her legal pad in her hand again. She was writing. Katherine walked to the table and opened the Alderman file. She found the exhibit index. She ran her finger down the page and stopped. Then she turned 4 pages forward and stopped again. The room was completely quiet. "How long have you known about this?" she said. "Since the original production," Marcus said. "I flagged it internally at the time. The correction was supposed to happen before the file was closed. Evidently it didn't." Katherine closed the file. She stood at the head of the table with one hand flat on the cover and looked at Marcus Coleman with the expression of someone arriving, late and without ceremony, at a place they should have been long before now. "Why didn't you say something?" she said. "When you came in tonight. You could have just—" "I did say something," Marcus said. "When I knocked, the room absorbed this." The associate near the window set the maintenance log on the table with a quietness that suggested he had understood something he was not going to say out loud. Lily shifted against her father's side. She looked up at him with the measured patience of a child who had concluded the adult portion of the evening was taking longer than expected and was choosing to be good about it. Marcus looked down at her and something in his face changed. Just slightly, just enough. The softening that happened when the world that existed before her made contact with the world that existed because of her. "The exhibits can be pulled from the digital record and printed tonight," Marcus said. "The file room on 12 still has the original case binders from the 2017 production. If someone pulls boxes 4 and 7, the complete exhibit chain is in there. It'll take about 40 minutes to compile." The female associate was already on her feet. Katherine looked at her. "Do it," she said. Then she looked at Marcus. "Please." The please arrived differently than her other words had arrived all evening. Smaller, more careful. The word of someone who had just understood that the register she had been operating in was not the right one for this room. The associate left. The male associate, after a brief and visibly uncomfortable assessment of where he should position himself, followed her. Katherine and Marcus stood on opposite sides of the conference room table. Between them, the alderman file. The scattered chandeliers overhead. Through the glass panel of the door, the plaque at the end of the hallway, barely visible in the overnight light. Lily had found a chair at the far end of the table and climbed into it with her horsebook, apparently deciding that the situation had stabilized enough to allow her to return to Chapter 11. She opened the book with the same businesslike efficiency she brought to most things, pressed it flat with her palm, and began to read. Katherine watched her for a moment. Then she looked at Marcus. "Coleman and Associates," she said. "You built this firm." "My wife and I built it," Marcus said. "She was the better lawyer. I was the better businessman. Between us, we got it right." A pause. "I didn't know she—" 2016, Marcus said. "She was sick for about 8 months before." He said it the way he said most things about that time. Not flatly, not with performance, but with the specific weight of something that had been carried long enough to become part of how you moved through the world rather than something you stopped to acknowledge. "After that, I made some changes." Katherine looked at the plaque again. "You came back to work here, in a different capacity." "I came back," Marcus said. He did not elaborate on the why of it, and his expression made clear that the why was not something he intended to provide. Katherine looked at the folder he had been holding when she pulled it from his hands. She looked at the papers she had knocked to the floor. She looked at his face, at the watchful stillness she had registered 40 or 50 times in 14 months, and processed as furniture, as infrastructure, as part of the building rather than part of the story the building was still carrying. "I grabbed those documents out of your hands," she said. "You did, because I assumed you had taken something." Yes, there was a particular quality to the way Katherine Harlow sat with that. She was not a woman who turned away from uncomfortable facts, and the uncomfortable fact currently in the room was the specific anatomy of an assumption she had made in under 2 seconds based on what she had seen and what she had expected to see. And the distance between those two things was sitting on the conference table between them like an exhibit she could not ignore. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Not a qualified one. Not the kind that explains the context first. Just the apology itself." Marcus looked at her. "I'm sorry," Katherine said, "for what I said, for what I assumed, for not knowing your name when it has been on my wall for 6 years." The room held the words. Marcus did not rush to fill the silence. He was not a man who filled silence reflexively. He let it sit for a moment, the way you let something sit when it has some weight to it and deserves not to be swept away too quickly. Then he nodded. Once. The nod of a man who had received something and was acknowledging it without making more of it than it was. "The alderman file," he said. "What time is the presentation?" 9 tomorrow morning." "Then you have time," Marcus said. "Get the boxes from 12. Pull Exhibit 14 through 17 and have someone verify the pagination against the digital record before you print. If the file room is locked, the building manager has the key. His name is Henderson. Tell him I sent you." Katherine nodded slowly. She looked at the file, then at the plaque, then at Marcus. "Is there anything?" she began. "We're fine," Marcus said. He looked down the table at his daughter. "Lily." She looked up from her book with the exact expression of someone who had heard their name and was making no attempt to pretend otherwise. "Time to go." Lily closed the book with her finger holding the page, because she had, at some point, found a scrap of paper to use as a bookmark but had left it somewhere, and climbed down from the chair with the particular efficiency of a child who had agreed to be patient for a long time and was now being released. She came to stand beside her father. She looked up at Katherine Harlow with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of someone who had no social reason to soften it. "Is the work done?" she asked her father. Not Katherine. Her father. "The important part," Marcus said. Lily considered this for a moment with the thoroughness she brought to most things. Then she put her hand in his and turned toward the door. Katherine watched them go. She watched Marcus steer Lily gently toward the hallway with one hand on her shoulder. Watched his daughter match her steps to his with the automatic ease of a child who had walked alongside this particular person long enough that the rhythm was simply hers now. At the door, Marcus paused. He looked back at the room, at the table, at the file, at Katherine standing at the head of it with the particular expression of someone who had come in tonight to solve a legal problem and had ended up sitting with something considerably larger. He did not say anything further. He turned and walked into the hallway, and his daughter went with him, and they passed the plaque at the end of the corridor. Marcus, with the same unhurried pace he had walked that hall 100 times, Lily pressing her horsebook to her chest with her free arm. And neither of them looked at it, because neither of them needed to. In the conference room, Katherine Harlow stood alone. She walked to the door. She stood in the hallway and looked at the plaque in the overnight light. She read the name. She had read it 2 minutes ago, and it had reorganized everything she thought she understood about the last 6 years. Reading it a second time did something different. It was quieter and in some ways harder. She stood there for a long time. In the weeks that followed, several things happened in sequence, and none of them were dramatic in the way that public reckonings were sometimes dramatic. There was no spectacle. There was no performance of accountability. There were simply consequences, arriving with the weight and pace of things that had been earned rather than staged. Katherine called a partners' meeting on the following Monday. She presented what had happened Wednesday evening without qualification or framing, the assumption she had made, the action she had taken, the name that had been on the wall for 6 years. 2 of the 3 senior partners knew exactly who Marcus Coleman was. The third had joined the firm after 2018 and had processed the plaque the same way Katherine had. The conversation that followed was not comfortable. The best ones rarely were. What came out of it was a series of decisions, some structural, some symbolic, some that would take months to implement and would never be visible to anyone outside the firm, that began with a phone call Katherine made herself to a number she had found through 2 intermediaries, because Marcus Coleman was not listed and had not expected to be. He picked up on the 3rd ring. She did not lead with the professional conversation she had prepared. She led with the one that was harder. She told him she had thought a great deal about what had happened. Not about the file. The file had been corrected. The presentation had gone well. But about the 14 months that preceded it. About the plaque she had never stopped to read. About the folder she had pulled from his hands. About the things a person revealed about themselves in the split second before they had time to consider what they were revealing. She told him she did not expect that conversation to resolve anything. She was not calling to be forgiven or to feel better. She was calling because he deserved to hear it from her directly, and because she had spent enough of her career telling clients that the difficult conversation they were avoiding was always the one they eventually had to have anyway, and she had decided it was time to take her own advice. Marcus listened. When she finished, he said, "I appreciate that." There was a pause. "Can I ask you something?" Katherine said. "Yes." "Why did you come back to the building in the capacity you came back in?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of a man deciding whether to answer, but the silence of a man who had the answer and was deciding how much of it the question actually needed. "My wife loved that firm," he said finally. "She built half of it. When she was sick, some of the partners came to the hospital. Some of them didn't. The ones who came, he paused. The work they do matters. The people they represent matter. I wanted to know if the thing we built was still the thing we meant to build when we built it. The only honest way to find that out was to see it from a position where no one was performing for me. The line was quiet. Was it? Katherine asked. Marcus thought about the late nights he had spent on that floor. The cases he had watched being prepared from the other side of glass panels. The associates working past midnight on briefs for clients who could not have afforded this firm without the pro bono commitments he had put into the original partnership agreement. Commitments that, he had checked, were still there. Mostly, he said, the parts that matter. Another pause. Then Katherine said, "There's a seat on the advisory board that has been informal since the reorganization. Structurally, it should have remained active. I'd like to bring it back, if you're interested." Marcus said nothing immediately. Not as a correction, Katherine said carefully. Not as a, she stopped and started again. Because you built something worth advising. And because we have been making decisions without the perspective of the person who understood it best. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I'm asking," Katherine said. He did think about it. For 2 weeks, while Wednesdays came and went and Lily read her horse book at her desk in the 14th floor break room and the plaque at the end of the hallway continued to be what it had always been. A thing most people walked past and Marcus simply knew was there. He thought about his wife, about the firm she had helped build and the floor she had walked across in good shoes while he was still learning the difference between a good lease and a bad one, about what she would say, which he knew without having to imagine it, because she had been the kind of person whose thinking he could still follow without her in the room. He thought about Lily, about the kind of man he wanted his daughter to see making decisions. Not the man who built things from nothing, because that story was done, but the man who decided what to do with what he'd built once the first chapter was over. On a Thursday afternoon in early March, he called Katherine back. The conversation was short. "The advisory seat," he said. "I have some conditions." "Tell me," Katherine said. He told her. There were 3 of them, and none of them were about money or title or the thing that went next to his name on any document. They were about the pro bono commitments, the associate mentorship program that had lapsed after 2018, and a quarterly review process for the kind of assumptions that went unexamined in firms like this one, until they scattered across a conference room floor at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. Katherine wrote them down. "Done?" she said. Marcus said, "Then we have an agreement." He was not wearing a suit when he went back to that building for the first time in an official capacity. He was wearing a jacket, the good dark one he kept for things that mattered without needing to announce themselves. And Lily was beside him, holding his hand and her horse book simultaneously with the multitasking efficiency of a child who had never seen a reason why those 2 things should be mutually exclusive. In the lobby, the security guard who had worked the desk for 2 years and knew Marcus by sight held the elevator for them. "Mr. Coleman," he said. Just his name, with a small nod that carried no ceremony and all of it at once. Marcus nodded back. Lily looked up at the guard, then at her father, then at the elevator closing around them. "Is this the place?" she asked. "Yeah," Marcus said. "This is the place." She thought about this as the elevator rose. "The one you built. The one your mother and I built," he said. Lily turned this over with the care she gave most things. Then she nodded once, with the decisive quality of a child who had filed something away and was satisfied with where it landed. The elevator opened on the 14th floor. Marcus stepped out into the hallway. The light was ordinary afternoon light, nothing dramatic about it, falling across the marble the way it fell on every other afternoon in every other building in this part of the city. At the end of the hallway, the plaque caught the light the way bronze always caught light, simply, without drama, with the particular permanence of a thing that had been put somewhere and had remained. Lily saw it first. She walked toward it the way children walked toward things that caught their attention, directly, without self-consciousness, and she stood in front of it and read the name. Then she looked at her father. "That's you," she said. "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's me." She looked back at the plaque, then at him, then at the plaque one more time, with the searching consideration of an 8-year-old who was putting two things together in real time. "Did they know?" she said. "The people here. Did they know it was you?" Marcus stood beside his daughter and looked at his name on the wall. "Not at first," he said, "but they do now." Lily considered this. She reached up and took his hand. Then she turned away from the plaque with the complete equanimity of a child who had learned, from the person standing beside her, that you did not need other people to recognize your name for it to mean something. The hallway stretched out ahead of them. At the far end, through the glass panel of the conference room door, Katherine Harlow was standing at the head of the table, speaking to the associates assembled there. She looked up once and saw Marcus in the hallway. She gave a single nod. He returned it. Lily tugged his hand gently, the way she tugged it when she was ready to move and was being polite about the fact that she had been patient long enough. Marcus looked at the room ahead of him, at the work waiting in it, at the firm his wife had loved and that he had, in the only honest way available to him, never fully left. Then he looked at his daughter. "All right," he said, "let's go in. There are people in every building who built it. In every firm someone helped found. In every room that bears someone else's name now, because names change and time passes and the people who remembered the beginning eventually become the people who pass the plaque without looking. What stays is the thing that was made carefully and with intention and with another person beside you who believed in it as much as you did. That doesn't diminish, it waits. And sometimes in a corridor at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night it introduces itself. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't already, subscribe. There are more stories like this one coming.